Okay, so let's start with a little, just an example of, we won't complete this case study, but just a little bit of going into a little more depth to give us some kind of context of what happened with a particular disaster. This is one that we've worked on quite a bit. This is the August 2023 Maui wildfires, often referred to as the Lahaina Wildfire. And this is so a lot of these things we're going to see with, and you guys should make note of this. So a lot of things we'll see with this case study is, A, B, and C. And then we'll see some other case study and we'll see C, B, and F. And then we'll see another one, it'll be A, F, and C. We'll see a lot of these things that are going to be consistent throughout the different disasters. Now the specifics might be different, the location might be different, but the sort of theme or the type of impact or the approach is going to be fairly common. There definitely are some common threads that run through these things, whether it's a volcano or a rainstorm or whatever. Okay, so let's talk about this. The first one is that most people will call this the Lahaina Wildfire. There was actually 4 fires on Maui in this event. But most people will refer to or have experience or have recollection of the most high-profile area. In this case, this big tourist town of Lahaina. So it was a pretty crazy. I just made a video for you guys, but I haven't finished rendering it with a drone flight over this area that I will try to see if I can finish tonight for you guys. But certainly by next week. But that just sort of shows visually where the fire went. But suffice it to say, this is a coastal town on the Hawaiian island of Maui. And this broke out in late summer of 2023, and it was quite dramatic and quite devastating. This is sort of a picture from the middle of a town with just all the where you can see some of the classic imagery of the area, these sort of thatched roof things, palm trees, that type of stuff, but everything is on fire, unfortunately. So as I said, this is really 4 different fires. So let me orient you to this. So this is the island of Maui. The island of Oahu, where the capital is and all that kind of stuff, is off to the left. Off to the left. The big island of Hawai'i is off to the right. That's the largest of the island chains islands. But Maui is one of the most visited by tourists. So all of the Hawaiian economy is driven by, or is supported by tourism. And so this is for better or worse, this is a decision Hawaii made several decades ago, and it's sort of the path that they're down. And so Lahaina is both, which is this town right here on this, what they refer to as the west end or the west side of Maui, has been an important urban center for hundreds of years. So this is where King Kamehameha, when he united the Hawaiian Islands all underneath one rule, this is where the government was headquartered, was in Lahaina. This is where lots of food was produced. This is one of the wettest places on earth, particularly this west side of the island. And that's also what attracted, and so a lot of really old growth trees were there, supported by this huge rainfall, the hydrology. And that also means that, amongst other things, sandalwood grew there. So you guys might have heard of koa, which is sort of a classic Hawaiian hardwood. Milo, koa, sandalwood, these are all important, very strong. Think of like redwood and teak and things of that, like that sort of nature, dense hardwood. A couple hundred years ago, when some Asian traders came across, they discovered this sandalwood, and they figured out it could make good masts for sailing vessels. So they started saying, hey, if you guys are sailing around this part of the Pacific and you break a mast or whatever, you can maybe go in here. And so that was the birth of Lahaina as also a big economic center. So a big trading center. So again, it's sort of the political center of the island. It was where a lot of food was also produced. And then at the same time, basically, the Americans have over-harvested the whales in the Atlantic, and they've spun out into the Pacific, and they've decided that we just want to keep getting whale oil for everything we need whale oil for. And so they went to the most desirous species, things like the right whale, so named because it was the right kind of whale to harvest. Easy to catch, didn't swim very fast, hung near the surface, produced lots of oil. And then as they would serially deplete these different populations, they would move to another area and or switch to a different species, a less desirous species, so-called serial depletion. And around this time, the whalers started coming to Lahaina. So this also became an international trading center. So all kinds of things grew up here. So supply depots, brothels, bars, missionary outposts, all that stuff. So it really was an international city with all the things you might imagine as a big trading port hub, etc. Yeah, I'll pause the rest of that story for now. But suffice it to say, Lahaina has been important for a long time for residents for hundreds and hundreds of years. So this is an example of, in this case, what we're looking at is we're looking at remote imagery of hot spots. So we're looking at remote, and this is time integrated. So this is where all the hot spots have been. And so this is essentially showing us the footprint of the fire. And the one we're going to focus on here is, even though there were 4 fires, this is near the volcano Haleakala. So there were 3 over here and 1 over here, but we're just going to focus on this one for the purpose of this case study. And this was really impactful. So the fire started off and started up here in the upland area. So the light gray are all houses and different pieces of infrastructure. The red are structures that were damaged or significantly damaged or destroyed by the fire. So the fire basically started up here and then went down this way, sort of hit the ocean and kind of splashed up and splashed down, basically. So why did, and this is a similar image right over here. Similar image. This is that image I just showed you, the data overlay to the destroyed buildings. But in this case, there's a bunch of green overlay. What that green is non-native European and Asian mostly annual grass species. And then on the left, we have a history of wildfire. And so this isn't these islands aren't where they actually are in real space. We just sort of clip them all out and squish them onto one screen so we can fit them in a square. But the reds indicate the fires that have happened in the last several years, and the size of the dots indicates the number and intensity of the fires. So is there any pattern you guys see with the fires in these different Hawaiian islands? Coastal? Yeah. So coastal lowland, right? And so so they are near the coast, but also what that means is that's also the flatter part of the islands. And it's a little bit hard to get a sense until you guys are there, but these are so the Hawaiian Islands are geologically very young, which means they're very up-down. They're very new geology. They're very, not super eroded on average geology. So it's very much an up-down, a pretty, the iconic jagged cliffs of, the Nepali coast and things of that nature. And so the flat land is really where we see a lot of this stuff. And that is where we have transformed the landscape most intensively. And so in this case on the right, and again, looking back on this image on the right, which shows the coastal plain around the town of Lahaina, the red is the infrastructure destroyed. The green is the distribution of non-native European grasses, which have mostly exploded to this extent in the last couple decades. So if we went back in time 100 years, we would not see this, like all these individuals that are visualized as green here, we would not see those individuals there. So the story there is basically we had all of this so this wetness, once we had the whaling going on and all that kind of stuff, then we had that brought the attention of other people, business people and commerce people and trading people, and they said, oh my God, it's super wet here. Wow, what if we used all this water for our purposes? And so that was essentially the nucleus of the modern industrial agriculture movement, which overthrew the government, killed native peoples and destroyed their society and took it over in the name of progress. And then to justify that, convinced the American government to then annex the place as a U.S. territory. And so because the folks that wanted the land were the dudes with the guns and the power, they said, okay, now we get to control this area. And so they took these landscapes and they basically turned them over to very, very intense industrial agriculture, meaning primarily sugarcane and pineapple plantations. And I'm skipping over a lot of Hawaiian history. We're not talking about Hawaiian history here, but so that and that sucked up all of that water into agriculture. And then in the wake of World War II, people started figuring out they could go to even cheaper places. Latin America, stuff like that. We get the term banana republic from these same type of operators. And so suddenly Hawaii, which was very cheap to produce pineapples and very cheap to produce sugarcane, start to become relatively expensive. And the producers run to other countries where they can pay people even less to work the fields and stuff like that. And so the tail end of that extends up into basically the 90s or so. And by the late 90s, the last of the commercial plantations, pineapple, sugar, etc., have exited and are no longer there. And so the owners of the landowners are like, okay, we're good, we're out of here. The most valuable thing they had, though, was actually their water, not the land per se. And so the water was then sucked up and purchased by the coastal fringe, which is mostly where the tourist hotels are. So if you guys go there on vacation or something, stay at a nice hotel or whatever, they're mostly hugging the coast. So we're now shunting that water that used to be in coastal streams, supporting coastal forests, mostly wet, tropical wet types of, Jurassic Park looking types of landscapes. It's now being sucked and just pumped directly to the houses and the development. So in the wake of doing nothing, all of this land that was cleared of the natural vegetation is now taken over by these introduced species. And those introduced species, while trees can burn, of course trees can burn, it's a little hard to catch a tree on fire like this. Grasses are much easier to catch fire. We call them flashy fuels, meaning that yes, of course, if we were trying to get heat off it and I had a little bunch of grass versus a log, the log is going to make more heat. But to get it going, the grass is much easier, right? And so those flashy fuels now covered the slope. And most of these dry out very rapidly. So unlike the historic landscape that would have been moist for most of the year and wet and shady and all that kind of stuff, now we have a very dry, a very deserty, a very a dead plant material covered landscape. And so that's setting the stage for what was coming. So this is what it looked like last year. So the question is, okay, so if the water was hitting the island and then was eventually going out to the ocean, like what was the problem? The problem is we've sort of bypassed all that ecosystem. So rather than that,
agricultural irrigation's already there?
There is no more agriculture. So that whole thing's been abandoned. So this whole area used to be, this whole area here used to be heavily irrigated, right? It was irrigated. So sugarcane is the most productive. I could maybe somebody's invented some new whatever crop, but for the most part, the most productive square meter on Earth, if we measure how much carbon is fixed, how much biomass is added per hour of the day, the most productive thing in the world is a sugarcane plantation, a modern sugarcane plantation. But that's because we throw tons of water on it, tons of pesticides, and tons of fertilizer. The most productive natural landscape, there's some debate as to how we measure that, but is if not number one, is very, very close to number one, are kelp beds out here in the Channel Islands and off Southern California. Incredibly productive. We come close to that in our anthropogenic system with all these energy inputs, water inputs, fertilizer inputs, that kind of stuff. And so that's what was going on in this green plain, is we were really intensively throwing all kinds of resources in here, for the purpose of today's discussion, including the water. Once the plantation guys left, they had the water rights. So part of their valuable part of their valuable holdings included the water rights. So they sold their water rights separate from the land, and they sold the water rights to the folks in the coastal fringe. And so they essentially installed ponds, installed pipes, and now instead of letting the water hit the mountain and then burble down the mountain and then the mountain into this and it's just bypassing all that.
I see now.
Yeah, cool. Other questions so far? Does that make sense? Let's see if this works. Okay, this will work now. So we're approaching the core of Lahaina. This is where, so the fire came from the hillsides up to the right of us and came down into the heart. This is last year. Of historic Lahaina, the heart of the historic residences of Hawaiian royalty, the heart of the original tourism trade and international trade, where whalers put in, where sandalwood was exported, all that stuff, and unfortunately went right down the gullet of this historic town. So right now, as we turn left, we'll see that much of the infrastructure is still destroyed. This is January 2024. So we have an emergency cell tower. That emergency cell tower is still there. They haven't replaced it yet. And a little bit of optimistic rainbow there off to the side as we get through this little rain cloud. And so as we pull in, you can see the huge swath of damage right here through the core of Lahaina town. So there's a little bit of building going on here. These are areas that were already prepped. Right here. So there were no structures in this little pad area. They were getting ready to be built. Untouched. So most of the areas we go in, you're going to see cordons, and so the public is not allowed into Lahaina right now. You have to have a residency permit, and you can only go briefly in. We're just getting ready for debris removal, which has been a problematic thing. And so this immediate core right here, as we come, these shops were spared. And so with all disasters, we have this bit of an irony of some areas avoiding the impacts, other areas being hit. So ironically, this little shopping complex right here, as we turn right, survived. So these stores are here, which is good for the community. There's some places to buy food, etc. But the residences, the historic waterfront, the harbor where our whale research boat usually goes out of, all of that is destroyed. And so what's gone in now are these barriers to the right and left. One, so that people don't go in, and two, so that there's a bit of a shielding from the public. So as we're continuing this way, we're continuing north here towards the tip of the west tip of the island. We are going through, so this is Lahaina proper. And these are all screens that were installed so people couldn't see the damage. And these other resort areas just north of us, which were basically unimpacted. And so a lot of the tourists now, this tourist-centric economy, everybody is, or the economy is built around, people coming in for vacation. And so this area has been screened, one, to give people some, well, for a bunch of reasons, but first and foremost to sort of prevent gawkers from gawking and stopping on the side of the road and taking photos and all that kind of stuff. So basically, resort areas just north of us, which were. So basically the fire came down here and didn't impact the area over here. This is where all the super high-end tourism stuff is. So ironically, the homes all got destroyed, but the places where you would go to vacation did not. And so one of the things we saw in the immediate wake of this fire, because they're so tourist-centric, is immediately the debate comes in, when do we reopen, right? Obviously, people have lost all their family members, they've lost their houses, they've lost their friends. It's incredibly painful and difficult. They don't have a place to sleep. But the deal that Hawaii has made with the world is that we're going to bring our money in by you coming in and spending money. And so if we said, don't come in at all, the economy doesn't grow and people don't have a place to, a paycheck kind of thing. So there's always a difficult call to make in that. How soon do you open up? How soon do you wait? Initially, all those hotels are paid by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and they're paid to house the displaced people. So initially, these people that maybe worked in that hotel are now put up in that hotel. And that lasted for about 3 months, and then they pretty much said, okay, got to get back to work, and we need those hotels for the tourists. So then we essentially evicted people, and there's a lot more to the story, but we sort of moved people out, and that really exacerbated this housing crisis, just as we're seeing now here in California with our fires. Also with these fires, particularly with these larger scale disasters that either are large disasters bordering on catastrophes, they often provide us an opportunity to think. And as horrible as they are, they provide an opportunity to maybe do something different. So we'll watch this for a second. This is a year ago, 4 days ago. And this guy right here in the middle, Archie, he's the guy that founded this. He's a famous, he was one of the first navigators on the first modern Hawaiian voyaging canoe. He now mostly trains Navy SEALs in San Diego for how to survive in the ocean. He's a super hardcore ocean-going dude. And he's from the island of Maui. So he organized this ceremony. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of context. So this is their culture. This is not for us. This is not for CNN or anything. This is these people's way of figuring out how to go forward. And so one of the approaches that they used was to touch back into their history. And so the Hawaiians are like, the South Pacific Islanders are like the master navigators on the planet. They sailed all around the Pacific without GPS or compasses or whatever, just fantastic navigators. By policy, we said that we don't like that culture because that is primitive people, and that is all that kind of stuff. And so we, meaning the Western world, try to actively suppress that. In fact, in the law, as Hawaii was becoming a state, we outlawed even the teaching of the Hawaiian language. So like many parts of our world, we've gone in, and the peoples that were first there, we've tried to sort of crush them and eradicate them. To recover their culture, these guys started what's called the modern Hawaiian Renaissance. And in the 70s, the law was changed to allow Hawaiian to be taught again in schools and things of that nature. And one of the things that these guys did was they decided we were like the world's like master navigators. Why don't we figure out how to do that? Unfortunately, they didn't have any guidance, so they had to figure it out. So they built the first ocean-going canoe called the Hokulea in 1976, and they started off. They built it in Honolulu, the behind of Hawaii, and they sailed it across the channel to Lahaina, and they crashed into the reef. They didn't know how to sail the thing, right? They're like, well, how the hell does this work, right? But they sailed to Lahaina because Lahaina was the historic home of all the master navigators. So they sailed over to Lahaina to find some people to get, help them. And long story short, there's a whole long thing going on here. But Archie was part, and some of these guys next to him were part of that original crew. When this fire happened, they said, we need to recenter our culture and we need to heal each other, just like we need to heal our buildings and everything else. So there are now 4 ocean-going kayaks around the world that normally are going all around. And they doing outreach and education and the cultural exchange. They recalled all of them. And so they came back to Lahaina. So this is only the second time in history that all these canoes were together. And so what's happening is all these canoes are landing on the beach in this, this burned, destroyed city. And they're going through protocol. And these guys are the residents of Lahaina, and all these canoes from other places are coming in and they're ritually welcoming them. And so that's what we're hearing. So we'll just watch this for a second more. Okay, so that goes on for a while. And so they're doing rituals. So they're tying into their past, which is what they've always done. So these guys are coming in, they're bringing certain traditional gifts, and the people that are there are responding, and everything has chant and ceremony. So that part is tying into our past. What led up to that was this thing. So this was never done before, and so this was a new tradition that was added. And so this was a gathering. I think I talked here about this. So all this is burnt up and destroyed.
Hey guys, so we're here in Lahaina, and one thing when we talk about resiliency, we talk about the ecosystem resiliency, we talk about financial resiliency, all of that. So this is Lahaina that has been consumed about 6 months ago by wildfire, complicated by all the things that we know are going on, manipulated landscapes, climate change, all that kind of stuff. But what we're seeing right here is an example of the community being resilient, the community trying to heal themselves, trying to heal the anger that has been generated and worry about conspiracy theories and different political differences and all that kind of stuff. And so this is a really cool example of the community deciding what it needed and trying to pull everyone together and to heal and to go forward. So right over here, we just had the very first private property be cleared of debris from the fire, so we can begin the physical rebuilding. And this is a great example of the cultural, spiritual, and emotional network of families and everything else. Network of families and everything else being healed. So this is an equally important part of the recovery process.
Okay, so this is about a 2-mile walk. Every several hundred yards is another thing. And so the 2-mile walk took many hours. And everybody was welcome. So nobody was turned away. You see people carrying the flags. Those flags represent both the cultural priorities as well as people from many, many nations who perished in the fire. They were honored and recognized as well. And every so often there is a pause and something happens. So in some cases it's a hula, in some cases it's a song. And one time they dumped rose petals on us from a helicopter. There's dragon drummings from mainland Asia. There's all kinds of things. And this was, again, not, elements were traditional, but this was an attempt to create healing. And so that's an important part of this stuff. And that was to recognize that when we have these disasters, we are hurt just like the landscape is hurt. And if we don't take care of both, it will lead to bad things. So the particular drivers of this particular disaster included severe drought. So again, I mentioned one of the wettest places on Earth was experiencing drought. How the hell does that work, right? That's because so much of the water is being, and so folks that were there in August of 23 faced water restrictions, right? In one of the wettest places on Earth. And that's not, there's absolutely enough water for everybody and the plants, but much of it was getting sucked off to the tourism industry. And so that meant that regular Joe Blow and regular business and whatever, they had to be careful with their water usage, right? And so, one, we just had reduced rainfall. This was intensified by the global atmospheric condition that year. It was an El Nino year. And this led to the air being particularly dry. So that meant that there wasn't as much moisture in the air. That meant if a spark were to get going, it's going to be more likely to continue to be a spark, right? It's going to continue to be a flame, a little glowing ember kind of thing. It also meant that vegetation, already that vegetation with nothing else, that vegetation can have a lot of biomass there that's burnable. But now when we add the drought on, it's even going to be more dried out than it otherwise was. So it's even easier to catch fire. And I'll just say that these invasive species are really, really good at outcompeting the natives. So one of the things that we do when we're there is we work on eradicating these exotics in particular spots and try to plant native stuff to try to begin the recovery process. But the invaders are very effective competitors. Okay, then we have the weather. So then we have this hurricane that was not impacting this. You might think, hurricane, that's great for a fire, right? It's gonna take. No, the hurricane did not hit Maui. It went near Maui. And so because it went near Maui, the movement of air that it generated actually made more forceful winds. This is the term for the katabatic winds in Hawaii. We call them here Santa Anas, or if we're in Santa Barbara, we call them sundowners. If we're in the San Francisco Bay Area, we call them Diablo winds. Essentially, the physics is all the same. It's air going from an inland spot, high pressure, going to a low pressure, more moist coastal area. In our case, that wind is coming from basically Nevada, coming through the mountains to the coastal plain here, particularly in Ventura and Los Angeles counties. Here it's coming off of these mountain passes, etc. Next is that we have the infrastructure is really vulnerable. So the material is traditional, much of it is traditional building material, old stuff that was built, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 100 years ago, that kind of stuff. Not of maybe more modern fire-resistant roofing and things of that nature. So that a lot of the infrastructure was definitely together. Again, because of the lack of housing, many people in this community were cheek to jowl. So whereas it used to be my house, or like 50 years ago it was my house, let's say, now it's like, or my grandma's house, now maybe my grandma's in the back and I'm in the front, or my sister is in the next, so we're like all like very densified because housing is so expensive there. Add to that, the like many places around the world, the utility there isn't maybe the most well-resourced, we'll just say. And so they have not upgraded their systems. I will say, Barbara, do we see a lot of telephone poles in the tourist areas? Yeah. So where the tourists are, no telephone poles, right? No overhead utilities. They're all undergrounded. But in the old town, in the old existing historic infrastructure spots, a lot of old wooden poles, kind of sort of leaning, that kind of stuff. And so that was particularly vulnerable to things like wind. And then it's also important to say that this area, that 2023 wasn't the first time a fire came through. This area has a long history of fires. The term Lahaina, it's sort of translated slightly differently, but it basically means hot wind, or it means dry, hot area place. That's the term that the colonists applied to it. The term for the town before we changed the landscape was a Hawaiian word for flying breadfruit. So breadfruit is one of the important food staples. Think of it kind of like a coconut, kind of like a big thing up in the trees. And they called it flying, and so they grew a lot of taro, which is a sort of a pond, a wetland plant that was used as a staple carbohydrate. And these breadfruits were a similar thing, but grown on trees, right? So another staple carbohydrate thing. And the town was flying breadfruit because there's so many breadfruits, so really productive food producing, but it was really windy too, right? So they'd fly off and sometimes smack you in the head, right? So when the Western powers came in, they're like, well, this guy sucks. We don't want that. So they started chopping all that stuff down. So that tells us that historically, even before we add climate change, even before we add all this crazy anthropogenic change, this area is just very windy, right? So to start off, this is a windy spot on the planet. And so the stuff we're doing aren't creating wind, but we are making the existing winds, the existing structure, more intense or more crazy. So here's U.S. Drought Monitor. This is just before. This is just before the fires break out, and this is where we're talking about in this part of Maui. And so this was in drought. This was Hurricane Lane, came through in 2018 and caused a similar phenomenon. So winds blew off the mountain from the land towards the ocean, and we see a few little fires. Thankfully, they got those out, and this brought rain, and so put it out. But it was very similar, right? It's just in this case, in 2023, instead of that hurricane going right over the place and kind of, pouring on the fire, it went nearby, but not in the same spot. And so here's a quote from the gentleman that was in charge of the emergency response, both then and in 2023, who is no longer in that position. But this is what he said in a post 2018 event debrief, basically. He said, meaning the Lane hurricane, the Lane-induced wildfire nearly reached Lahaina town. And had it jumped Lahaina Luna Road, it would have been devastating, right? So this is another theme we'll see. Scientists, people like you, people like me saying, oh my gosh, this looks bad. You guys, we should do something. And people are like, yeah, okay, you don't understand, dude. It's expensive to do something. Like, oh my God, we got to do something because people might be hurt. Yeah, dude, you don't understand, And then the fire happens, and then immediately people say things like, we had no idea this could ever happen. This was never forecasted. Yes, we have a pretty good understanding now of risk, of hazard, be it from fire, be it from hurricane. So this notion that we had no idea is not factually correct. This is just a quick example. We'll wrap up here in a second. I know you guys are getting ready to go. So this is Dora. This is the hurricane in 2023, right? So it's about 600 miles away from the island of Maui, but its impact, and so the colors here refer to the intensity of the wind field. So the hotter the color, the stronger the winds. And we can see, obviously, the winds are super strong around the hurricane itself. But if you look back to Maui, we see some red spots there, right? Indicating that we're essentially getting hurricane force winds. And now those katabatic winds that I mentioned do not have to be hurricane strength, but certainly that's what we saw here in Los Angeles. Certainly that's what we saw during the Thomas Fire. Certainly that's what we saw here. So katabatic winds don't by definition mean they are hurricane strength, but increasingly they are very, very strong winds. And it doesn't matter what political party you are, it doesn't matter where you live. When the winds are blowing 100 miles an hour, It doesn't matter if you have 3 fire engines or 300. You can't fly a helicopter in that type of wind, right? That's a non. You have to wait for the conditions to change. And this is the track of that hurricane, right? So it went. It didn't hit any of the islands, but yet had this. So this is lane. And then this is lane 2. Okay, and so this is an example from 2023. So here is that example of vulnerable infrastructure, right? Now, vulnerable infrastructure could take all kinds of forms. It could be a bridge. It could be your hospital is not particularly secured. In the 1994 Northridge earthquake, I was at UCLA at the time. The hospital there, which is a big regional hospital, was made up of a series of buildings that were built over different decades. All 7 buildings went different directions. So when I would go up to see my advisor, I would get in this elevator and the door would open and I would hear, and I'd look and there was a crack that was like 2 feet, like that. The building where the elevator was had pulled away from the other building and there was a couple foot gap and there was a bunch of pigeons living in between, in the elevator shaft basically. So that would be an example of vulnerable infrastructure. So vulnerable infrastructure can take all kinds of forms, but in this case, this is really obvious. This is high power lines that are snapping, right? The telephone poles are snapping and bringing that electrical current into contact with vegetation or people or structures. And this is a picture from a police cruiser as the fire is unfolding. And another aspect of this, we'll pause in a second. The other aspect of this is also who gathers attention. We saw that from a quote we read earlier today. But, scale, just in terms of spatial scale, these other fires are also quite huge. But the attention all goes to Lahaina. And that's where the greatest death was. That's where the greatest property value destruction was. But it's also just where people know, right? So Altadena got nuked, right? People in New York City never heard of Altadena, right? People in Florida don't know what the heck. They think it's a place, maybe milk or something. I don't know. They don't really know what that's about. But Palisades, people have heard of that, right? People have heard of where the famous actors and stuff. So it's a natural thing. It always happens that some areas get more attention than others in a disaster. That's natural. But we should make sure we manage that. We should make sure that, and that can be a useful thing, right? We love to save the snail and the stinky flower, but people are going to donate money to save the tiger, right? And so don't waste your time fighting that, but just realize that and make sure when we have discussions with people, we make sure, oh yeah, the tiger is important. So is the stinky flower, right? So is the mushroom, that kind of thing. And so that's really important because people will feel forgotten, and also that could lead to the rebuilding also being forgotten. I think that, and so this is us as we were leaving, heading out to Maui a couple weeks ago, just before the fires broke out. This is a universal problem. Okay, I think maybe we'll pause. Oh, okay. Well, this will be our last slide. We'll pause here. Okay, so examples of transformed landscapes, right? So our class is focusing on disasters. We're not going to focus on all this human history, but it's important to acknowledge it, right? So we're not going to spend a huge amount of time, but in this context, the Hawaiians existed before humans got there, the Polynesians got there, and rapidly changed the landscape, right? They did a lot of impact. They had a lot of impact. They made things way different. They made most of the bird species extinct, for example, on the islands and things like that. And then we get into this, as we mentioned, the colonization era and the changed landscape, all this area, in this case, behind the place that burned or inland of the place that burned, that collapses and sets the stage. So economic collapse is often, or radical change, is often one of the key drivers before a disaster happens that sets us up, that makes us vulnerable. Right? We can't afford as many firefighters. We can't, it could take many forms, but this is a common pattern. And then the intensified developments are also key. So, and again, we can tell many stories about this over the semester, but this is always the challenge, right? And this, again, it's not as if people are inherently evil necessarily, right? But it's just something we have to acknowledge, that when you and I go to a planning meeting and say, hey, people, we should have concrete roofs. You have to be ready for the developer guy to say, dude, That's going to raise the price of the house by $50,000 or something. We're trying to keep the price affordable, right? And that's a debate to have. But to survive disasters, making things resilient, making things resistant to the damage is usually, in fact, I don't know any case where it's not, much more efficient than letting the disaster happen and having to pay for the recovery in lives or ecosystems or infrastructure lost. I'm sure I'm going to break that before this semester's over. But so that's a quick case study. When we come back next week, we'll start talking about fires proper, more generally, more generically. Does that make sense? Any questions before we wrap? Any questions about that quick little bit of overview of a fire in Lahaina? Okay, all right, great. You guys have a good week. I will turn the rest of the stuff on, and you guys will see stuff soon. And so I will email everybody when I have Canvas activated. Thanks, you guys.